Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to episode 384 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where we look at mysteries from the twin perspectives of faith and reason. In this episode, we're talking about demons and people's questions about them. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today is Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Be sure to stick around, everyone, for the end of the episode, as we'll have your feedback on our recent episode on feeling the future. But first, since the beginning of the human race, people have had to deal with the harmful spirits we know as demons, but not everyone today believes in them. The 19th century French poet Charles Baudelaire wrote that the best trick of the devil is to persuade people that he doesn't exist. So today there is a lot of confusion about demons, and recently Jimmy answered a bunch of questions about them. So, do they really exist? What are they? And how can we stay out of their evil clutches? That's what we'll be talking about on this episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. So Jimmy, tell us about today's episode.
Today we're going to be listening to a recent episode of Catholic Answers Live in which I answered a bunch of questions about demons. In the first hour, the host, Cy Kellett, asked me the questions, and then in the second hour, the callers do. So this was a topic-based episode. It's not like a regular Ask Me Anything or Weird Question show. The reason that we're airing it is that lately I've had some delays in getting Mysterious World scripts done. In July, we went to Italy. Then as soon as we got back, I got sick. Then after frantically catching up on things, I got a pinched nerve that knocked me out productively for a couple of weeks. The good news is the pinched nerve didn't hurt, and it turns out that they don't always hurt, but it did interfere with my ability to type and get scripts done. I've thus needed to make some special arrangements, because even though I could just take a week or a month off, I really want to have new episodes for the listeners every single week. Recently, we did 2 episodes based on an interview I did on Glitch Bottle, in which ceremonial magicians asked me questions about demons and related mysterious subjects. And right after that, Catholic Answers asked me to cover demons from the Catholic perspective. So I thought that I'd use that episode here on Mysterious World so that we could also cover Catholic questions about demons in addition to the ceremonial magicians' questions, and that's what we'll be doing today.
So what questions will we be covering?
We're going to be looking at things like, is it permitted to think of demons merely as metaphors for human evil? What is a demon? What do they actually have the power to do in our daily lives? Are they equal in power? Why did they fall? How can we avoid their evil clutches? What are the differences between phenomena like possession, oppression, and obsession? And a whole bunch more.
All right. Then let's listen to your recent Ask Me Anything about demons.
Your host yesterday, it was the Blessed Trinity, and today we're going the opposite direction. We're going complete opposite direction. Try to think, what's the opposite direction of talking about the Blessed Trinity? Yep, we're going to talk about demons today. We got Jimmy Akin here with us, senior apologist at Catholic Answers, and I've got questions I want to ask him about demons. And then the second hour, I'll let you ask him whatever you'd like to ask him about demons. And that number is 888-318-7884. And Jim, in addition to being a senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, Jimmy is author of, look at a whole bunch of books. The Bible is a Catholic Book, The Fathers Know Best, Teaching with Authority, A Daily Defense. I got a stack of Jimmy Akin books right here next to me. Jimmy Akin, welcome. Thanks for doing this with us today.
My pleasure, Cy Kellett.
Is this a topic that you have covered on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
In various ways, yes, and have done a good bit on it and plan to do quite a bit more in the future.
Okay, so I know you have done some very good stuff. I've enjoyed the stuff you've done on exorcisms, and it just seems an area that is ripe for both scholarship and chicanery.
Yep, both of those things.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah. I guess because it's unseen and people. So I know that you take you take the approach of faith and reason, and you'll apply reason and revelation to these things. So let's get right into it. First of all, I do think many modern people would say, look, when you read the Bible and you read about exorcisms and demons and all of that, this is essentially metaphorical language. We're talking about kind of human evil or the troubles that people get themselves into. And the demon is a metaphor, not a real person, not a real personality. What do we make of that as Catholics?
Well, this is an idea that has kind of been around to different degrees in different periods of history. When it really became popular was in the 19th and 20th centuries, basically after the European Enlightenment. And it has manifested not only in Christian circles in Europe in general, but it's also manifested in Catholic circles, particularly, like I said, in the 19th and 20th centuries. You would want to say, from a faith perspective, well, what evidence do you have for this claim? And people who favor this hypothesis might say, well, when we look at the symptoms that are displayed, for example, by some of the demoniacs in the Bible, they sound something like symptoms of other conditions. For example, when Jesus meets the Gadarene demoniac, Mark notes that, he used to bash himself with stones and howl and things like that. And you could say, well, that sounds like behavior that could be caused by a mental illness, this self-harm and incoherent ramblings and stuff like that. There are various psychological illnesses that can cause people to do things like that.
Right.
Then in several of the Gospels, after they have had the Transfiguration and they come down from the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus and his core disciples encounter a man who has a son that is epileptic. And he says he's had this demon since childhood, and it causes him to fall into the fire or fall into the water, and he foams at the mouth and things like that, which are symptoms of epilepsy. And your disciples weren't able to drive the demon out, but what can you do about it? And Jesus then drives the demon out. And you could say, well, this is a physical set of symptoms here. This boy had epilepsy, and it just got interpreted as if it's a demon. And so that's the kind of basis that someone who favors this metaphorical view of demons would have. They point to these other auxiliary symptoms and say these were cases of misdiagnoses. But the problem is that the argument does not entail its own conclusion. Just because someone has symptoms that can be explained by other known conditions like mental illness or epilepsy or things like that, that doesn't mean that's the root cause. And so these same demoniacs displayed other symptoms. They would, for example, display, like the Gadarene demoniacs displayed an alternate personality that, talked to Jesus and said, what have you to do with us, Son of God? Have you come to torture us before the times? And because this was a common view that, there had been a set time when the demons were going to be punished. And so this alternate personality is asking about that. Now, you could try to say, oh, but that's just another mental illness. That's dissociative identity disorder. But how did the demons know who he was? How did they know he's the Son of God? They're also displaying preternatural knowledge here.
Right.
And so there are things that go beyond the symptomatology that you could otherwise pick up. And then there's the fact that the exorcisms are effective in these cases. Now, you might be able to say, well, in the case of dissociative identity disorder, maybe Jesus had some therapeutic effect by performing an exorcism, but that ain't going to work on someone with epilepsy, because epilepsy is a physical condition that is not subject to the same kind of treatment that psychological conditions are. And so even looking at this from a purely secular point of view, as I have been for the last couple of minutes, if you look at the whole symptomatology, instead of just cherry picking it to support your hypothesis, it turns out that the symptomology as a whole does not support the conclusion that these demons are misdiagnoses or they're just metaphors or something like that. Then there's the fact that the Holy Spirit, moving from the reason perspective to the faith perspective, there's then the fact that the Holy Spirit has been guiding the church for the last 2,000 years, and it has guided the church to understand these as real entities. Mm-hmm. And even in the world today, we have instances where people who are demonically possessed, for example, can do preternatural things that science is not capable of explaining and that can't be reduced simply to physical or mental illness. And so, in fact, that's one of the things that the church insists on before performing a major exorcism, is that competent people look at the case and eliminate the possibility that this is just a mental or physical illness. And so it's only when the evidence goes beyond some kind of mental or physical illness that an exorcism is even permitted. And then there's the fact that the church teaches, as indicated in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, that demons are real creatures, they are real intellects, and so forth. And so I would say, from a point of view of both reason and Catholic faith, we're not permitted to simply interpret demons as metaphors for evil or things like that.
So you've kind of come near to it, but then if someone says to you then, Jimmy, what is a demon? Really, what is it? How do you answer that?
Well, it's going to depend on how you're defining it, whether you're defining it from a specifically Catholic point of view or from a broader point of view, because there is a sort of anthropological concept of a demon, because you go anywhere in the world and basically every culture and every religion has a category for a harmful spirit. And so, there are harmful spirits in Judaism, there are harmful spirits in Christianity, there are harmful spirits in Islam, there are harmful spirits in Shinto, there are harmful spirits in Buddhism and Hinduism and so forth. So, and in native religions as well. So basically everywhere you go, everybody has a concept of a harmful spirit. And so, speaking anthropologically, you could say, okay, well, that's what a demon is. It's just any harmful spirit. Now, in Christian circles, it has a more refined meaning than that. And this deals with the history of the term. In Hebrew, to start with Hebrew, the term for demon is shed. And the book of Deuteronomy, for example, says that the gods of the nations are shedim, they're demons. And you say, okay, well, what's that? Well, we know it's some kind of harmful spirit. We can tell that much from the word usage. But they're also associated with the gods of the nations, are also associated with some high-ranking officials in God's heavenly court. As far back as Genesis 6, but in many other passages, like at the beginning of Job, we read about God's heavenly court containing these high-ranking figures known as sons of God. And today they would be classified as angels, high-ranking angels. So that would suggest these are good figures. And what Deuteronomy seems to be saying is that at a certain point in time, when God established the nations, he put them under the tutelage of the sons of God. But then later we see evidence that some of these angelic creatures that are ruling the nations have gone bad. We see that, for example, in the book of Daniel, where we read about conflicts that are going on between the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece, and between the prince of Persia and Michael and Gabriel, who are archangels that are on God's side. And so if it's true that God put the nations under the care of these high-ranking heavenly officials known as sons of God, but later they're having fights, including fights with angels who are known to be in God's service, that would suggest that a bunch of them have gone bad. And that would explain why Deuteronomy can also say, why the the Old Testament can also say that the gods of the nations are demons. They started as angelic creatures, but then they went bad and became demons. And that's the basic understanding of what demons are today. In church history, a demon has been understood to be a bad angel. Now, there are a couple of items of historical note that should be borne in mind, because the term demon hadn't always been used that way. Originally, the term daimon is a Greek term, and it doesn't mean what Christians mean. A daimon was basically a spirit that was between one of the high Olympian gods and humans. And so Greeks had this kind of multi-layered concept, some Greek of the heavenly hierarchy. Some Greeks would talk about there being a supreme god, like a demiurgos, a craftsman that made the world, and then there were the lesser Olympian gods, and then there were the demons, daimons, and then there were humans. And daimons, I'll pronounce it that way to keep it straight. Daimons were creatures that humans could potentially have interactions with and maybe even gain control over. And that term got borrowed by early Jews and Christians, and used for this additional category. But there's also another category that we find in a good bit of Jewish literature down through the Second Temple period, which is when Jesus lived. The early Jewish sources we have interpret the Genesis 6 narrative, where the sons of God come down and marry the daughters of men, as the early sources all interpret that to mean angelic creatures came down and had relations with human women and gave birth to a group of people called the Nephilim. You'll sometimes hear people say Nephilim means fallen ones, but it doesn't. It's actually an Aramaic term that means giants. And these giants then had a war, and they died. And in the Second Temple period, the common understanding of what a demon was a ghost, a harmful ghost of one of these Nephilim. Oh. So there's a different understanding at this point. And so if you bear in mind that in this period, the term daimon sometimes referred to this Greek concept, and sometimes it referred to this ghost concept, it indicates that in this very early period of Christian history, there's some additional flexibility in how the term demon might be applied, but eventually it settled out to mean any spiritual creature that's not a human, in other words, an angel, any spiritual creature that is not a human and is harmful.
All right. That's why we asked Jimmy these questions. You get those comprehensive answers. More on the demons to come, and then we'll get around to your questions about the demons. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's Catholic Answers Live, right back after this. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World gets a new episode each Friday. Guess what? That means today. What dropped this morning, Jimmy, on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
Well, today is the beginning of September, and so it's a Patrons Questions episode. And this one's different than our usual Patrons Questions, because this summer I had a trip to Italy, a pilgrimage that I led. And a couple of evenings during the pilgrimage, we let the pilgrims ask questions. So these were questions specifically from the pilgrims who were able to join us for the trip. And many of them had to do with things that they experienced on the trip, including a lot of questions about a particular church in Rome that we visited. This is a Capuchin church, and locally it's often called the Bone Church. Oh. And the reason for that is you go into it and there's a series of chambers that the walls of which are covered with artwork, and the rooms are just filled with artwork made from human bones. It's also sometimes called an ossuary, which just means a place of bones. And they used the bones of the monks who lived in this monastery from the 1500s to the late 1800s to make all of this artwork as a memento mori. Memento mori means reminder of death. And so it's very startling and arresting because you're walking along and here is a chandelier made out of human bones and things like that. And it's very dramatic, but that's the point. Is to remind you of the reality of death. And, you're going to end up here, not literally, but you're going to end up in the realm of the dead, just like these people did. And so if you want to have a good afterlife, you want to live in a way that's going to ensure you a good afterlife. And so it's not just a set of works of art, it's an object lesson to teach the spiritual lesson of preparing for death. And needless to say, after walking through those chambers and seeing all this bone art, the pilgrims had a lot of questions about that. And in today's episode, we also show you pictures in the video version of the podcast of what all that looked like.
And your partner in mystery, Dom Bettinelli, was there?
Yep.
He'll be on this episode.
Yeah. He was there. He's the one who's reading the questions to me.
Check it out, mysterious.fm, or check out Jimmy Akin's YouTube channel, growing each week more popular. Already, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, one of the most popular documentary podcasts around. Get it wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's see if we can find some way. The topic this hour and next hour as well is demons, and we decided we wanted, and I'm really glad we did, given what we just learned in that first segment about demons. I don't like to let the show go too long without finding a way to make it about me. So I want to know what they can do to me. So what do these these personalities actually have the power to do in our daily lives?
Well, it's kind of a general question. It doesn't have a single answer because demons are like humans in that they can do a bunch of stuff. It's like if you said, well, what can other humans do in our daily lives?
Yeah.
Well, they can do a lot of things. It depends on what they choose to do. And demons can actually do more in our daily lives than other humans can because they're more powerful than humans. They're fallen angels. And so angels are more powerful than humans. So demons are also more powerful than humans. They could do bunches of stuff, including stuff that I'm sure humans would even have trouble imagining, maybe even stuff we can't imagine. But we can say, well, what do they commonly do? And that's an easier question to answer. And basically, they are spirits that have closed themselves to love, which means they've closed themselves to God, who is love, and they've closed themselves to the love of God's creatures, so they don't love us. And basically, to the extent that they interact with us, they want to cause us problems. And in particular, they want to lead us away from God and to close ourselves to God's love the way they have. So they're going to try to, for example, get us to worship them rather than to worship God. That's one of the things that the gods of the nations did. They wanted people to worship them. That's not so much a temptation today, not here in the West, because polytheism has fallen out of favor. So that's not a big temptation for most Westerners. But another temptation that can equally lead one away from God is going to the opposite extreme of not believing in any gods and being either a practical or an explicit atheist. And so they can try to tempt people down that path to lure them away from God. They can also try to tempt them into a variety of other sins, whether it's sins of the flesh or sins of the mind, like pride and stuff like that, or hatred. But basically, they're going to try to tempt people into one or another kind of sin. Now, in saying that, and so at least some of the temptations that people face in their lives are likely caused by demonic influence. But there are a couple of notes I need to make about that. The first one is just because you have a temptation doesn't mean that it's a demon causing it. Classically, Christian theology has divided sources of temptation into three kinds. They're summarized by the words the world, the flesh, and the devil. The world means the example given by others. So like if you see someone else indulging in a sin and you think, oh, well, that's not so bad, maybe I can do that too, that would be an example of the world or someone else's example tempting you. The flesh is our own inbuilt desires. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to specifically be a sexual temptation. It could be something else. But it basically, we are born as a result of original sin. We're born with inbuilt desires that are disordered. And when we give in to one of those disordered desires, that's an example of temptation being acted upon that comes from the flesh. The third, the devil, is the catch-all category for demonic influence. So demons can have an influence in tempting people towards sin as part of their ordinary activity, but that's only one of three sources. And we know we have lots of interactions with the world and the example of others. We know we have lots of interactions with our own disordered desires. So if you just automatically assume, oh, I've got this temptation, it must be coming from the devil or one of his minions, you're giving the devil too much credit. He's not that powerful. He's not that big of an influence in our lives if you're excluding the role of the world and the flesh. And so that's the first note I would have about considering what they can do in our daily lives. The second note is, since there's no way to distinguish for sure which, if all demons are doing is low-level ordinary temptation stuff, there's no real way to be certain of where that temptation is coming from. It could be the world or the flesh or the devil. And because there's no real way to discern for sure which one it's coming from, it's not worth worrying about. Instead, when you're facing a temptation, the thing to do is don't worry about where the temptation comes from. Don't get paranoid about this is a demon or something, but just trust God and ignore the temptation wherever it comes from, and pray and do what you need to avoid temptation. But don't get hung up about, is this being caused by a demon or am I under demonic attack? Because unless the demons are doing something extraordinary that becomes detectable, there's no way to figure that out, and it's thus not worth worrying about. It's just going to cause you needless worry and anxiety and wasting time and energy on a question that can't be answered. So just trust God and forget about it.
That is very helpful advice. You know what? There's lots. Well, I mean, demons is one of the most interesting topics for some reason. We got movies about demons. We got all kinds of websites that get into this topic. But that's one of the nice things about having Jimmy here, to take what has been revealed to us as Christians, what can reason do with that revelation, and what can we actually know about the demons. So we'll continue with more of that right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I'm not sure about mixing the groovy music with the demons. It's good. It's a little relief. It's a little relief from the demonic theme of. We're talking about demons with Jimmy Akin today on Catholic Answers Live. Shortly, about 25 minutes from now or so, we'll be taking your calls. So if you have questions about demons, look, Jimmy will talk to anybody. So if you're not a Christian, don't worry about it. We'd be happy to talk with you. If you are a Christian, if you're a Catholic, whatever. You're welcome to call with your questions about demons. And I've got a few more, and then we'll open the lines up for you. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. So a demon, you gave us the basic Christian idea that a demon is an angel that went bad.
Passed its sell-by date.
But yeah, that's right. It's sour. It's a sour angel. So what's the power ratio like? Like, does a demon, are they basically just the equals of the angels, or how does that work?
Well, that would seem to be the case. It could be different if, like, they lost power or gained power when they went bad, but we don't have anything in Revelation that tells us that happened. So the presumption, it's like a human. Humans don't, if you got a bad human versus a good human, it doesn't mean the bad human is weaker or stronger than the good human. So in the same way, if you got a bad angel, the assumption would be that it's just as powerful as it was before it went bad. It's just using its powers for evil now. Now, there are different kinds of angels, and the high-ranking ones are going to be more powerful than the little lower ones. It's kind of ironic when you look in the Old Testament, there are a number of different terms for heavenly creatures. They're not all called angels in the beginning. Kind of at the top, you have the sons of God. They're the ones who are like members of God's court, and they're clearly high-ranking, and either at that level or just below it is the enemy of God, the devil, Ha-Satan, or Satan in Hebrew. And he functions, as we see in Job, as the heavenly court's prosecutor. So he's right up there. He's playing a key role in the heavenly court. He might not be a son of God, but he's really high up. Then there's God's army that shows up periodically, and it's got a commander who's obviously higher ranking. We meet the commander, for example, in the book of Joshua. There are also throne attendants that God has. In Isaiah, he sees the seraphim guarding God's throne, and he describes part of what they look like. They've got 6 wings and so forth. He doesn't focus on what their bodies are like, but actually we pretty much know what the bodies of the seraphim looked like. Now, they don't really have bodies because they're heavenly creatures. They don't have bodies, but the way they were depicted or imagined, conceptualized by ancient Hebrews, was with serpentine bodies or snake-like bodies with wings. This is a known motif in ancient Near Eastern art. These figures appear elsewhere. For example, they appear in Egyptian art, where their function is to guard sacred space against unauthorized people approaching it. And that seems to be part of what they're doing in Isaiah. They're around God's throne, and they're preventing unauthorized people from approaching God's throne. Also, part of how we know, now these figures, when we see them in Egyptian art, they're often called uraeuses. That's the name for this snake or winged snake figure. But in Hebrew, they're not called uraeuses, they're called seraphim. An individual being a seraph. And that's also the word for a serpent. So even if you don't speak Hebrew, it's not obvious, but the word seraphs or seraphim tells you this is a snake-like creature. And you might wonder, what are snake-like creatures doing around God? I mean, in the Christian imagination, snakes are typically bad, but what they also are is frightening and dangerous. So, God around his throne, if you think about it from an ancient perspective, he's not going to have little weak, sissified, throne guardians. He's going to have big, terrifying throne guardians. Yeah. You're not authorized. You're not getting in here. And so that can explain why God would have snake-like creatures, at least ones that humans imagine as snake-like creatures around his throne. Then Ezekiel sees the cherubim. And this is another kind of creature that we know from ancient Near Eastern artwork. These appear in Mesopotamian art, and they're often depicted or sometimes depicted as bulls with wings and human heads. And they're described sometimes in the Old Testament as creatures that God would ride. The Psalm, kind of like men ride a horse. It says that God in the Psalms rides on the cherubim. But that's not quite the way Isaiah perceives them. He perceives them as having 4 different faces, the face of a man, the face of an ox, the face of a lion, and the face of an eagle. And he sees them as having 4 wings, and they also are throne attendants. One of the things we find in
ancient Near Eastern art is that kings often had what are called chariot thrones. It's like a throne, but it's got wheels on it. So it's a mobile throne. You could make it roll. And that's what is depicted in Ezekiel. He sees God sitting on a chariot throne. And so God's throne has these wheels. And it's being upheld by the cherubim. And that's something we also see in ancient Near Eastern art, is servants who are throne attendants holding up the king in his throne, which has wheels on it. So that's essentially what Ezekiel is seeing in his vision. It's not a UFO. It's God's
Okay.
it's God's chariot throne and his throne attendants. Now, you'll notice I've mentioned all of these different kinds of heavenly creatures. I mentioned the sons of God. I mentioned the Satan. I mentioned the cherubim. I mentioned the seraphim. I haven't yet mentioned angels. Well, they're down at the bottom. I mentioned the army and its commander, but I haven't mentioned angels. They're down at the bottom. And what the word angel means, malakim in Hebrew, it means the same thing as angelos does in Greek. It means messenger. And so the malakim, the angels, are the messengers. They're like at the bottom of the heavenly court, and they run and deliver messages for God. And so since we humans are even lower than they are, it's normally the messengers that we have contact with. And so what happened is, over the course of time, we started using the term messenger to refer not just to the little lower down angels that we most commonly have contact with, but to all of them. And so that's how the term angel it broadened its scope from just being the lowest members of the heavenly court to being everything in the heavenly court. Because if normally when we're dealing with a member of the heavenly court, we're normally dealing with an angel, well, then you can just anything from the heavenly court.
It's like shorthand, kind of, yeah.
Yeah. But you'll notice these different levels, they all would be presumed to have different levels of power. And so if you have a member of one of these choirs of angels, as they're commonly called, who's gone bad, they would presumably have the same power that they did before. And that seems to be supported by the fact that we see them having what you could call fair fights or equal matches. If you look in Daniel, at one point, Daniel says a prayer to God, and 3 weeks later, the angel Gabriel shows up. And Gabriel says, "Hey, I would have been here early 3 weeks ago. I heard your prayer, but the prince of Persia resisted me. And the thing that finally let me get through was Michael intervened. And right now, Michael, he's basically got the prince of Persia in a headlock, and he's holding the prince of Persia. He's got him in this holding action to let me get through the lines to give you the interpretation of this vision. And then when I'm done, I'm going to go back, and Michael and I are going to whale the tar out of the prince of Persia." So what this shows is that the prince of Persia had enough power to stymie Gabriel by himself. And Michael has enough power to stymie the Prince of Persia by himself, but not enough to completely destroy him. And it's going to take the combined forces of Michael and Gabriel to cause the Prince of Persia to fall. Mm-hmm. So that would suggest we're dealing with fairly equal levels of power between good angels and bad angels. And so I would say that demons and angels are equal in power, remembering the fact that they have different power levels within themselves. Some are weaker and some are stronger.
All right, that'll take us to the break. Let's do the break, and we'll come right back and get more on the demons with Jimmy Akin, and then we'll take your calls. 888-31-TRUTH is the number. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest. And for this Friday, we're talking about the demons and trying to get the real story about demons, because there is Well, there's just lots of all kinds of things that it'd be very hard to discern which are true and which are false if you just devoted yourself to finding out what's on the internet, for example, about demons. So we're asking Jimmy. And let me ask you this, Jimmy, about demons. Mm-hmm. If you could tell me, I feel like I know what tempts me as a human being, and it's very often bodily. As a matter of fact, pizza is one of the primary things. I don't think pizza could tempt a demon. And so it's hard to conceptualize why a demon would go bad. Why would an angel go bad, thus becoming a demon?
Yeah, well, so the church does not have a teaching on this. There are certain opinions or proposals that get floated, but the church has not signed off on any of them. So it's also, if you think, well, hey, they're a lot smarter than us, why would they go bad? Why would they commit sin? Because that's not going to lead to good consequences for them. But then you think about it, even Solomon, I mean, he was the wisest of Israel's kings, and he had significant sins. So simply being smart doesn't protect you from doing bad. And as it's sometimes been said, sin makes you stupid. It leads you to do stupid things. And that's definitely the case with the demons. But in terms of what specifically it was, there are different proposals. The earliest proposal that addresses the question of why at least some angelic creatures fell is the one we find in Genesis 6 and in a lot of later Jewish literature down through the period in which Jesus lived, which was some of them got tempted by women. And this is very clearly the reason why some of them fell in some Jewish literature. Now, I would say, because angels don't have bodies, that I would think there's, to the extent this in any way reflects something that might have happened in history, there's got to be more to it than that. I would say they probably fell, and then they
I see. Yeah.
It manifested in some way that involved women. But this is, just trying to be honest about what the ancient evidence would indicate before I try to interpret it in a modern light. From a Christian perspective, this is not the first time that angelic entities have been bad. Earlier than that, we've got the snake in the Garden of Eden. And, talking snakes are not literal creatures, and ancient people knew that as well as we do. And there is evidence from quite early on that it was understood, certainly by the Second Temple period, that the snake in Eden either was Satan or Satan was behind the serpent. Mm-hmm. And so that would indicate a prior fall. And that's how the question has typically been framed in a Christian context of why did not demons in general fall, but why did the devil fall and take these other demons with him? And there are different proposals here. One of them, probably one of the more general ones, says, well, it was pride on his part. That's based in part on a later passage in Isaiah, where it's either Isaiah or Ezekiel, I believe it's Isaiah, where you have a taunt song that is sung against the king of Babylon that talks like, oh, I'm going to be like the day star, which is Lucifer. That's what Lucifer is, the Latin name for the planet Venus, which was the morning star and the evening star. And you have the king of Babylon being really highfalutin. It's like, I am going to ascend to heaven. I am going to be like the morning star and the evening star. But then according to the taunt song, no, you're going to be cast down to the ground and you're going to be like food for worms. And some people have looked at this and read it and said, oh, it's talking about the devil. Except it's not. It's talking about the actual king of Babylon, just like the text says. So I don't think you can really, even though pride is an element in this taunt song, the literal sense of this text does not apply it to the devil. It applies it to the king of Babylon. So I would say it's more speculative about the role pride played here, although I don't think it's a bad guess. There are also other suggestions that are more specific. One of them that I find rather interesting is found in the book of the life of Adam and Eve. This is a book from around the turn of the era. It's either a little bit before Christianity or a little bit after the beginning of Christianity. It's unclear whether the original version of the life of Adam and Eve was Jewish or Christian. But it's a really fascinating book. I did a two-parter on Mysterious World about it, and it basically tells the story of what happened with Adam and Eve after they got kicked out of the garden. And it's really kind of a moving story, because if you grew up in paradise, you were created in paradise and you lived in paradise, and then you screwed up and now you're kicked out of paradise. Like, hell, what would the first thing you do be? You just caught doing something really horrible. Your first instinct would be to
apologize, maybe?
Yeah, and so that's exactly what Adam and Eve do. They try to apologize to God. Maybe he'll let us back in. Yeah. And then it's worse on Eve, because she was the one who was more consciously tempted. She feels absolutely horrible. And then when it's clear they're not getting back into the garden, now they got to figure out, how are we going to survive? How are we going to eat? They've never hunted before. They've never done anything like that. And so it's a very moving story, but as part of it, we get flashbacks to the role of the serpent and what his perspective was on all this. And so they end up talking about how the serpent fell. And in the life of Adam and Eve, what it says is, okay, in the beginning, after God made the earth, he made Adam, who as the image of God. And so what do you do in the ancient world, Psychelet, with the image of a god?
You worship it?
You worship it, right. And so that's what the angels were supposed to do with man. And so you've got Michael, the archangel, saying, everyone do obeisance to man, honor man as the image of God. And the devil, the serpent, is thinking, hey, I was here before him. I don't owe him any honor. He's after me. And that's what caused the devil to fall. It was the demand to honor man as the image of God. Oh. And so that's the theory articulated in the life of Adam and Eve. But there are other theories too. Some will say, well, God revealed that Jesus was going to be born as a human, and the devil couldn't stomach that. It was like, humans are these puny little fleshy wormy creatures, and how could the Son of God possibly become incarnate as one of them? And how could I possibly honor him as the Son of God if he's become this little fleshy wormy creature? And that's what caused the devil to sin. But because Revelation does not give us the answer, I'm comfortable just saying sin makes you stupid. And beyond that, it's speculation. We don't really know. There are some interesting speculations, but I wouldn't bet the farm on any of them.
Well, I'll turn it back to myself then. We're talking demons with Jimmy Akin. And now that we've learned about these demons, I would like an answer to this. How do I avoid them and stay out of their evil clutches?
Okay, well, one of the few things we know with good confidence about demons is they don't like holiness. This is, in fact, one of the diagnostic criteria. If you read the 1614 rite of exorcism and the 1998 rite of exorcism, one of the characteristics is it's not sufficient because, bad humans also don't like holiness. But if demons display a notable aversion to holiness, like they don't want to look at a picture, they don't want to say the name Jesus, they don't want to look at a picture of the Virgin Mary, they don't want holy water or holy oil touching them, all of those things will set demons off. They really don't like it. And so if you know that demons don't like holiness, stay holy. Make sure you're in a state of grace, say prayers, go to church regularly, take communion, wear religious artifacts that are holy, that have been blessed even. So basically just maintain a life of holiness and don't worry about it beyond that. We shouldn't get paranoid about demons being under every rock, because they're not. And they would, in fact, love us to worry about them being under every rock, because that wastes our time and makes us fearful. But just live a life of holiness and don't worry about it beyond that. Now, that's not a guarantee that demons are never going to try to mess with you. I view demons as kind of like bears. They're opportunistic predators. If you're out in the woods, you don't have to invite the bears. If they smell food on you, they'll come. On the other hand, no one has to sick a bear on you. It's just if you run across one in the woods and you're in a vulnerable state, they may take advantage of that. Demons, it's the same way. So, just go about your life, but don't be in a vulnerable state. Maintain a life of holiness and, be confident in God and trust in Him, and don't worry about it beyond that. And if something unfortunate happens with a demon, then there are additional steps that can be taken. But fundamentally, just be holy, love God, and enjoy life.
I do want to, before we go, ask, and I've only left you about 3 minutes on this one, but you hear these three words: demonic possession, oppression, and obsession. I have heard these words in reference to what the demons, different ways demons can bother us. Is there value to these words? Do they point to real things, and what are they?
Yeah, they're used to classify, and there's also another term, which is vexation. Okay. They're used to classify different extraordinary forms of demonic manifestation. So this is not the ordinary stuff like I'm a little tempted to have too much pizza or whatever. These are very unusual, and consequently, they're not very common. But one of them is oppression, which is manifest demonic activity in which the demon is targeting things in a person's life, but not the person himself. Like maybe the demon is trying to ruin your finances or something. Then there's vexation, which is manifest demonic activity where the demon is attacking a person's body, like he's causing epilepsy or deafness. Then there's obsession, which is where there's manifest demonic activity where the demon is attacking the person's mind, like causing mental illness or extraordinary temptations. And then there's possession, which is manifest demonic activity, which at least at times results in the demon seizing control of the person and acting as an alternate personality.
All right. And on that last one, possession, that's the one that they never make movies about vexation. I don't think, anyways.
It shows up occasionally in movies.
Oh, does it?
It's just usually not the main subject.
So, are there any cases of possession that you have looked at that you thought that's a quite convincing case?
There are some more than others, and I do plan on covering specific cases of possession in the future on Mysterious World. But part of the problem in this area is client-patient confidentiality. Oh, yeah. Just like it can harm a person's reputation if you disclose their medical history, it can harm a person's reputation if you disclose their spiritual possession history.
Yeah.
And so the church is very careful about what it discloses, and there's not a lot of data available, which makes it hard to investigate cases from a critical point of view. Oh. We tend to just have to rely, for the most part, on the analyses of the people who were there at the time.
I see.
But it's not as easy to do investigations from a distance. But that's not going to stop me from making the attempt.
I hadn't thought about that. There is a reputational thing, like you were possessed. Oh, and thank you for the job application, but we've chosen a different candidate. You could be like, well, it got better. I'll tell you what, we're going to continue to talk about demons. If you have questions about demons from any angle, whether you are Christian or not, you are welcome to call. Jimmy's happy to talk with you.
We'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make this show possible, including Father Dean M., Anthony H., Arthur, Connor B., and Ian P. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and all the shows at StarQuest. More than 90% of our financial support comes from individual donors like you, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is also brought to you by DeliverContacts.com, offering top brand contact lenses at always low prices with free delivery. Visit DeliverContacts.com. And by Father Robert Spitzer and the Magis Center's new Critical Catholic Cosmology program. Join a community of adults and educators seeking to grapple with the truth claims of science, philosophy, and the Bible in a classroom environment, with special appearances by Father Spitzer. Ground your faith in evidence with a critical method that integrates heart and mind. Earn 6 graduate credits over 2 semesters at a third of the cost of most graduate programs. Online or in person in the Boston area on Tuesdays beginning October 7th. Go to magiscenter.com/institute. magiscenter.com/institute, or search Critical Catholic Cosmology to register today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett. Your host, Jimmy Akin, is our guest. We had a lovely extended conversation, if you can use that word, for a discussion about demons the first hour with Jimmy. And then at the end of the second hour, I said, go ahead and dial if you want to ask a question about demons. And I've rarely seen the lines just in sequence just light up one after another. But currently there's one line open. So if you've got a question about a demon or demons in general, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. Again, I will emphasize, you don't have to be Christian to call. You don't have to be a believer of any kind, or you can be a practicing Catholic, whatever, anybody, the whole range. You're welcome to call if you've got a question about what the Catholics believe or understand about demons. All right, every line full now. So let's let people ask Jimmy their questions about. Oh, you know what? I'll tell you what. I do want to ask you something, Jimmy, and then I'll go to him. Mm-hmm. I forgot to ask you what's on the Jimmy Akin podcast this week. What dropped on Monday?
Well, this last Monday, it was on the Tetramorph.
Oh,
I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Finally, I mean, like, what? When is he going to get to the Tetramorph?
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember what tetra is. Is that more than a quadromorph? Oh, okay, if tetramorph is a quadromorph, then all right.
Yeah.
What is it?
Okay, well, recall how last hour I mentioned that the cherubim that Ezekiel saw had 4 faces, that of a man, that of an ox, that of a lion, and that of an eagle. Well, that imagery has been used in Christian circles as a symbol for the gospel, for the four gospels. And there have been different ways of trying to estimate which animal symbol should be associated with which gospel. There is not just one way of doing this. There have actually been a bunch. And so this symbolism of the 4 faces of the cherubim being applied to the 4 gospels is known in Christian art as the tetramorph. Tetra meaning 4 and morphe meaning form or shape. So it's the 4 shapes or the 4 forms that are used to symbolize the Gospels. And it goes back, this usage goes back to the late 2nd century, but it's taken different forms or shapes down through Christian history. Different people have matched up these images to the Gospels in different ways. So that's what I talk about in this episode.
I don't know that anybody else is doing that kind of work. Who else is talking about the Tetramorph on their Catholic podcast? Check it out on the Jimmy Akin.
And the Decepticons.
Oh, Tetramorph against the Decepticons. I'm going with Tetramorph myself in that battle.
Good bet.
Andrew's in Minnesota. Andrew, thank you so much. Thank you for starting us off. Go ahead with your question about demons for Jimmy Akin.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my call.
Sure.
My question is, I was curious to what degree, if any, you're familiar with the work of Dr. Michael S. Heiser, rest him, and the mnemonic nature of the Nephilim, and also connections to Mount Hermon and the gates of Hades and allusions to that in the Gospel of Matthew?
So I'm very familiar with Mike Heiser's work. I knew Mike when he was alive. Unfortunately, he passed on fairly recently, but I knew him. I've interviewed him. I've read multiple books of his, and I think he's performed a valuable service for people by retrieving some literature from the Second Temple period that had largely been forgotten in Christian circles. Like, even though some people knew about the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, it was something that only people who were pretty arcane specialists really had an awareness of. And Mike did a really good job and a service to the Christian community by calling attention to this material as background information that can be helpful in reading not only Genesis but also the New Testament. So I think he did a lot of good work. I think his work is incomplete, though, not just because of his unfortunate passing, but also because I think there was an aspect of the work that needs to be done that he didn't really address. And that was how to integrate these ancient views with what we know about the world now. So Mike would typically say, okay, so here's what the evidence indicates this text meant. But then he wouldn't say, and how should we understand that in light of what we know now? Like today, we have a clearer awareness. Like back when Genesis was written, they didn't have a clear awareness of the fact that angels don't really have physical bodies. That's a discovery that happened later in Christian history. And so it wouldn't have even been a question for the author of Genesis. Well, how could a demon mate? How could an angel mate with a human? Because they didn't view demons as non-corporeal the way we do. And so Mike did a good job in just saying, here's what this text means. But I think there's then a reception work of how do we receive and understand that to the extent we should, in terms of what we know today, in terms of later doctrinal development. And I think Mike didn't really do a lot of work in that area. And so I would say he did a good service in what he did, but I think his work is incomplete in that respect.
Thank you.
Yeah, and personally, as to his work on Reversing Herman, I believe is the title of the book.
Yep.
Do you see any merit to the connections that he draws between the account as laid out in First Enoch or Enoch 1 and also in the Gospel of Matthew, for instance? Do you see there being...
There may be some intertextuality. There may be some textual references there, but I don't really have an opinion on that. And I think that the material described in these texts, like First Enoch, if it is to be given any credence at all, it's written from such a literary perspective that it needs to be heavily modified in order for there to be a modern reception of it. So this is one of the aspects of Mike's work that I think is unfortunate in that he really doesn't get into this. But I think that if we were to have a modern reception of some of this material, we need to treat it as very, very non-literal. And Mike doesn't tend to explore that question.
Andrew, thank you very much. We're talking demons with Jimmy Akin. All the lines full at the moment. Terry's in Kansas, listening on 98.9 FM. Terry, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Jimmy and Sai. Thank you for taking my call. My question is how a blessed Saint Benedict's medal has exorcist attributes.
Okay, well, Saint Benedict is someone that people have turned to for help regarding demons. You can't do a major exorcism, through Saint Benedict or his medal, but people have turned to Saint Benedict asking for help with demons, because wrestling with demons on the spiritual level was something Saint Benedict did during his own lifetime, and so it's been natural for people to say, "Hey, please help me with struggles I'm having in this area." And in the course of time, it became a custom for people to use a medal of Saint Benedict, and there's even a blessing that's been authorized for not only members of the Benedictine community to give this medal, but for other priests as well, basically asking God to bless the medal and use it as an instrument in helping people avoid problems with demons. And so it's not that the medal itself has such properties. It's not like there's a magic that the medal has. This is all based on prayer. We're praying to God and asking for Saint Benedict's intercession to use the medal as a help in dealing with demons. And that's the sense in which there is efficacy here. It's not that the medal has this as one of its own properties. It's that we've asked God and Saint Benedict to help us out through the medal, and they can do that.
Terry, that brings us right to the break. I hope that was a helpful answer to you. We'll be right back with more on demons with Jimmy Akin. At the moment, one line open. Jimmy Akin, our guest this hour. As first hour, we had an extensive conversation about demons, who they are, what they do, how you can avoid them, all of that. This hour, we're open to your questions on demons, whether you are very knowledgeable about demons or not at all, whether you are fully committed Christian or not religious at all. If you've got a question about demons, we'd love it if you'd call and ask. 888-318-7884. Going to upstate New York now, where Bryson is waiting. Bryson, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question.
Thank you. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I appreciate your work with me. So my question was, the idea that, okay, the gods of the nations are demons, and there's an idea proposed by later church fathers that the pagan gods of various places, like the Roman pagan gods or of various places, are demons. But it struck me that everything that was regarded as a god in every sort of polytheistic culture around the world is a demon. Might be that seems a little too simplistic on the face of it. So the question is, when looking at some sort of polytheistic or pagan religion from various places in the world, wherever it might be, looking at an entity or so-called God, what's a good way to determine, okay, this might actually be a demon, or it might be something else, or it might be nothing at all? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I'd say is we need to think through the conceptual space here in terms of what are the possibilities. Now, Deuteronomy provides an ancient Israelite perspective on the gods of the nations that they knew about. And it says they're demons. But there are other possibilities too. And we see, as an illustration of those, that emerged later in God's progressive revelation. So just because they have one conception at one period in God's revelation, that doesn't mean additional options won't open up later in God's revelation. And we actually see that starting to happen in the thought of St. Paul. In his thought, in 1 Corinthians, he does have the idea that foreign gods are demons, but he then parallels that with the statement that that an idol is also nothing, and and that alludes to the option that you mentioned of maybe some of these gods are nothing at all. Maybe they're just imaginary. And then there's also a possibility of maybe someone could actually be worshiping God, but under another name, and or have some idea of God, of the true God, even though it's under another name. And St. Paul seems to allude to that in some of his statements, like in Acts 17, where he quotes from pagan sources and draws genuine spiritual insights out of them, like we are all his children and stuff. And he's quoting a pagan text that actually in its original context is referring to Zeus. So this would suggest that maybe the pagan author has a genuine spiritual insight about the relationship of divinity and humanity, and the pagan author is using the term Zeus to express that, Zeus being the highest of the Greek gods. And Paul is still picking up on this insight and applying it in a Christian sense. So we've sort of got three possibilities about what these pagan deities are. They could be the true God under another name. They could be nothing at all, or they could be demons. And I think it's too simplistic to just assume any one of those and say that explains everything. We have a much greater awareness of the diversity of human religious thought than the ancient Israelites did. They thought there were basically 70 people groups in the world, and they didn't even have a detailed knowledge of all of the beliefs of those 70 groups. Today, we have much more awareness of just how big humanity is and how great the diversity of belief is. And I agree with you. I find it hard to believe that for every single spirit that somebody somewhere has worshipped, that there is always a specific demon that corresponds to what these people believed, and in a one-to-one fashion. So I think that there's a mix of phenomena going on here, consistent with the development of these different trajectories that we see in St. Paul's thought. My solution to your basic question, though, of how can we determine what's what in a particular case, is I would say that we can't for sure. But if I'm open to all of the possibilities in a particular case. Let's say I'm dealing with someone who is an Odinist and they worship Odin. Well, okay, Odin might be totally imaginary, and no one in the spiritual world is picking up on the prayers that this Odinist is saying. But it also could be that some demon for the moment is impersonating Odin, and maybe at another time another demon will impersonate Odin. I wouldn't assume it's always the same demon all the way through history, or that there's any demon at any specific point. So I don't think there's a way to make a determination of, is a demon actually active here, apart from looking at the data that is generated in a particular case. If an Odinist, for example, starts doing preternatural things that cannot be explained by psychology and natural causes, then I would be more inclined towards there's a demon who's answering his prayers to Odin if genuinely paranormal stuff is happening. On the other hand, if nothing paranormal is happening, I'd be more inclined to either there's not a demon here, or the demon isn't doing anything extraordinary, nothing more than common temptation. So I don't think there's a way to find a one-size-fits-all solution here. I think we have to be open to the different possibilities and not judge them prematurely, but in an evidence-based way.
Jonathan, thank you. Lots of folks on the line, so I'm going to keep going. We're talking demons today with Jimmy Akin. If you have a demon question, there's just one line open right now, 888-318-7884. Going up to my town, just up the coast now, Jonathan in Oceanside. Welcome, Jonathan. Go ahead with your question.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. My question is concerning Earlier in the first hour, Jimmy mentions that there are three sources of temptation, the world, the flesh, and the devil. My question is, can the devil or demons in general use the other two sources, the world and the flesh, to tempt us? Or are they separate and there's no overlap between the three sources?
Well, let's have Cy Kellett answer this question for us. So, Cy Kellett, the question is, can the three sources of temptation overlap in some ways? Now, earlier you mentioned a desire of the flesh or inbuilt disordered temptation for pizza, right?
Yes, I would
but
say
we
so.
also talked about another category of temptation, which is the world or the example of others. Can you imagine situations where the example of others might combine with your own disordered desire for pizza in a way that would strengthen the desire for pizza and make it more likely you're going to give in?
Add a demon to that, and I think you've got a picture of my life right there, Jimmy.
Let's keep the demon out of it for a minute,
all right.
just to make the principles clear.
Yeah.
Could the example of others lead you to eat too much pizza based on your own desire?
Yes.
I mean, just think of that's the purpose of advertising, right? So yeah, these categories can combine. And so in addition to the example of others, tempt and incite, eat more pizza, like through advertising, or Ansai's own inbuilt desire to eat too much pizza, a demon could also be there whispering in his ear, hey, doesn't that pizza look good? Why don't you have some more? Mm-hmm. So of course, these different categories can combine. But as I said before, since there's no way to pull them apart, the thing to do is not really worry and rigorously identify what's causing what. The thing to do is just trust God, ignore the temptation, and get on about your business.
Okay, Jonathan?
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks very much. That's why I can't watch the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, though. Just too much temptation involved there. Yeah, too much. Kate's in Bloomington, Indiana, listening on 89.9 FM. Glad to have you, Kate. Go ahead with your question.
Thank you for having me.
Sure.
My question is, could my son's father, who is now in his 50s, still be affected by what he did when he was in high school, which was he joined a satanic cult? He rebelled after getting kicked out of his Baptist school that he had been in since kindergarten. I think he was a junior. And when I met him in 2006, he told me the story, and I just kind of blew it off and didn't really realize how serious it was. And I'm a cradle Catholic, and basically, long story short, when our son was about 3, he just started acting really, really strange. And about a day after I blessed our home with blessed chalk over the doorway, he walked out on us, and there are many paranormal things that happened after that. And I still pray for him, and our son's a teenager now. And I just can't move on because I feel like he needs help, and there's no one there for him but me. Like he needs an exorcism or something.
Jimmy?
And I just don't know what to do.
Okay. Jimmy?
Well, this is a sort of complex question, and so we're about to hit the hard break, and I don't want to give short shrift to this question. So, Kate, I'm going to defer the answer until the other side of the break so that I can do it justice.
Can you hang on through the break, Kate?
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. That's not the devil's music. I don't know if there is devil's music. People have been calling since about Wagner. People have been saying that's the devil's music.
Earlier.
Even before Wagner. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that I believe in that, but we're talking about devils or demons today. If you've got demon questions, as I said, 2 lines open, 888-318-7884. However, we want to get to a quite serious question from Kate in Bloomington, Indiana, asking about her son's father, who got involved in satanic stuff when he was young and seems to still be affected by it in his 50s. Jimmy?
Okay, so the the basic answer to the question of could there be some ongoing influence from what he did when he was in high school is, well, sure. All kinds of things are possible. I mean, if you got a young guy in high school with a pink carnation in a pickup truck and he gets drunk and goes out driving, he may flip the truck and injure himself in a way that's going to haunt him for the rest of his life. So, injuries and things that were received in high school can still have effects later in life. And, so obviously, if he did join a satanic cult, that could have affected him either by causing some kind of damage to him or by attracting the attention of demons to him in a way that they're still taking an interest in him and still messing with him, or both. My question, though, since this is over a period of 30 years later, would be what evidence is there that that's the case? Because just because something's possible doesn't mean it's likely. And there are lots of people who have, minor flirtations with Satanism when they're young, and then they get over it and they grow up, and it doesn't have any lingering effects like that. So in trying to evaluate a particular case, what the church does and what paranormal investigators do is they make a list of all of the possible explanations for the observed phenomena, and then they go down the list and see if there is a natural cause for these phenomena. And only if there is no natural cause is one warranted in proposing that there is a paranormal cause. So in the case of your former husband, or perhaps current legal husband, you said that he started acting weird at a certain point a number of years ago. And, well, that could be because of demons, but it could also be because he was developing a kind of mental illness. You said he left at a certain point, and, well, that could be because of demons, or it could be because there were other stresses in the marriage at the time that were purely natural. So in terms of early things like that, I don't know the situation, but I'm not hearing anything that demands the demonic as an interpretation. And so without something that demands the demonic as an interpretation, I'm going to do what the church would do, which is fall back on normal, natural causes for these things. Also, if your husband had, for example, at some point after his involvement with this group, if he had become a practicing Christian and repented of his involvement in this group, that's something that would be evidence against ongoing demonic activity. The thing that you said that I found most interesting was that after he left, there have been ongoing multiple paranormal events. Okay, if that's the case, then it's possible that they could be produced by demons. It's also possible that if they're genuinely paranormal, they're being produced by something other than demons, or it could be that they're not actually paranormal. They just appear to be, but they have purely natural causes. This is something that paranormal investigators learn, is that when you're investigating, let's say someone thinks they've got a ghost in their house, even when the evidence is that they have a ghost in their house, there's probably other stuff that is being misinterpreted as ghostly activity that's purely normal. Because once people have the idea that I've got a ghost in my house, they start interpreting everything through that lens. So every bump in the night becomes, oh, there's that ghost again, when really it's just a bubble in your water pipes or something. And the same thing can happen in this kind of situation, where one becomes concerned that my husband or former husband is being affected by demons, and then everything that happens surrounding him gets analyzed through the lens of, oh, here's something strange that happened, I bet that's demons again, when in fact it may not be. So, and this is part of why the church requires exorcists to carefully look into a case and say, are these phenomena something that is better explained by medical conditions or by psychological conditions? Because normal phenomena like medical problems and psychological problems are more common than paranormal phenomena like demons. So if normal causes can explain the reported phenomena, then they should be understood in that light. It's only if the reported phenomena go beyond what nature could itself result in that we're warranted in proposing a demon as the explanation, among other paranormal causes like angels or ghosts or other things. So, I just don't know enough about the case to offer an opinion one way or the other about what's going on here. But I would say, just like the church would not automatically jump to the demon explanation, that there are other possible explanations, and we shouldn't just jump to the demon explanation either. In terms of what could be going on with him, well, it's like I said, it's possible that there's residual damage or interest from when he was in a satanic cult, but it's also possible there isn't, that the problems he may be experiencing now are due to other factors, genetics, environment, free will, all those kind of things. If you're concerned for him, which you obviously are, and that's a praiseworthy thing, there are things you can do. Obviously, you can continue to pray for him. Hypothetically, you could talk to him about these things that are going on, whatever they may be. You could also see if he'd be interested in getting some counseling, perhaps from a Catholic priest, perhaps even from an exorcist. He might be open to that. If an exorcist were to determine that there is likely demonic activity here, then the exorcist could perform an exorcism, or he could even perform an exorcism from a distance, because exorcists don't have to be physically present with the person to perform an exorcism. So hypothetically, he could be exorcised from a distance. There are also things less than exorcism that a person can do if it's less clear that a demon is involved and that a full exorcism is warranted. Like there are what are known as deliverance prayers that you and others could say for him to help him out, even if this isn't a full-blown case of possession. So there are things you can do, and I want to encourage you in that regard, but I also want to just caution you that we shouldn't be quick to assume it's a demon or demons when it might in fact be something else.
And Kate, I will leave it there because there are quite a few still on the line ready to talk about demons. I hope that was helpful to you. Off to Oklahoma we go. AJ is in Oklahoma. Go ahead with your question, AJ, for Jimmy Akin.
Hi, Jimmy. Thanks for taking my call. I just wondered why Padre Pio was, I guess the word would be, oppressed by the devil, since he was a saint, received the Eucharist every day, prayed 15 rosaries a day.
Well, so I assume that what you're referring to is my comments earlier about how demons don't like the holy. And that's true, they don't. That's in fact one of the diagnostic criteria the church uses to diagnose demonic possession, is the fact that the alternate personality has a notable aversion to the holy. So it's a reasonable question, why would demons go after someone who is notably holy? Well, it might not be the kind of thing that they would normally do because they don't like holiness. But just like some people enjoy a challenge, some demons would seem to enjoy a challenge. It's like the bigger they are, the harder they fall. So if you can take down someone who is really noticeably holy, you're going to get more points and more street cred from your fellow demons. They're going to respect you more. And so I would imagine that just like there are humans who climb mountains precisely because climbing the mountain is hard, that there are demons who would want to conquer Mount Padre Pio, if at all possible, just precisely because it's hard, and they know it's going to be harder on them because of how holy he is. But I would suspect there are at least a few demons who are attracted by saying, hey, let's see if we can corrupt this potential future saint. And that's the kind of challenge that stimulates them and that they get off on. So that would be my explanation. It's not what most demons do. It's not the way they normally act. But the history of some saints, not all, but some saints report in things like demonic attacks would suggest that at least some demons are interested in that, either because they enjoy the challenge or because they want to ruin the good that the saint could otherwise do if they weren't attacking him, or things like that.
What do you think, AJ?
Thank you.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you. You brought us right to the break. We'll come back with more questions on demons for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest. Demons, our topic. Lots and lots of calls, but I'll tell you what, we've got a couple lines open now, so if you want to get in, if you've got a question about demons, whatever your own beliefs are, if you've got a question about what Catholics believe about demons, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. We'd love talking to you. It doesn't really, you don't say, oh, but I don't think they want to talk to me. They want to talk to Catholics. No, anybody. You can call 888-318-7884. If you've got a demon question, pick up that phone. Karen is in Portland, Oregon, listening on the great modern day Catholic radio. Glad to have you here, Karen. Go ahead with your question.
My question is with regards to Jimmy's comment about the fact that Genesis 6 ought to be taken in a largely symbolic way. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if, Jimmy, you were familiar with the work of Timothy Alberino, and I was hoping you would be, because I wanted to ask your opinion about it.
What specifically did you want to ask my opinion about?
And try speaking right into the phone. We're having trouble hearing you. So as clear as you can, right into the phone.
Oh, here, let me take you off.
Yeah, that's just advice for the audience. Never use speakerphone when you're talking to a radio show. It always causes problems.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, we got you nice and clear now. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, so Timothy Alberino holds that the Genesis 6 is literal and that it's all explained in the book of Enoch, and that the angels mentioned there are not angels as Aquinas describes them, that they are something more like a hybrid, and that when they copulated with the sons of, or daughters of men, they produced the giants. And he said there's he's an archaeologist, and he's gone all over the world and uncovered tons of evidence, apparently, that confirms this. And I was just wondering if you were familiar with his work and what your opinion of it was.
Okay, so I know the name Timothy Alberino. His website advertises him as an author, researcher, and explorer, but as far as I can tell, he does not claim to have any kind of degree in archaeology. So I don't think he's an actual archaeologist. Now, there is a relationship between Genesis 6 and the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch was written in the Second Temple period, so well after the Book of Genesis was written, and it is based on material that is reflected in the Book of Genesis. There are also several other books that were written in this period that are also related to what's in Genesis 6, but at least based on what you said, if he wants to claim that this event was literal and there literally were angelic beings who mated with humans and produced giants, I would want to say, well, what's your evidence for that? I mean, I know what the texts say, but where are the bones? What DNA can we look at? If you want to say this was all a physical event, I want to know what evidence you have that this was all a physical event, and I'm not familiar with any good evidence to that point. So I would be very skeptical of what Timothy Alberino claims, if that's what he actually claims. There is a big risk of people who are operating in a kind of fringe area like this, who are not really careful scholars, which is what I'm trying to be, but who are sensationalistic and are trying to propose and explore ideas precisely because they sound dramatic, and they try to inflate the evidence for things when really there isn't strong evidence here. So I think the golden mean is one, meaning the balanced approach, is one that is open-minded and evidence-based, that neither is totally dismissive nor overly credulous, overly easy to believe sensationalistic claims. And so I would say that based on my reading of the evidence, I think that people like this have some genuine insights into what the text means that actually previous and better scholars have formulated that they're now copying. But I am unaware of any good evidence that would support the idea of this being a literal physical event, though I'm open-minded. If they could produce such evidence, I'm open to hearing it. I just haven't seen any good evidence of that.
Karen, thank you very much for the call and for the question. On we go, trying to get everybody on with Jimmy before the end of the hour. Alyssa is in Central Texas, listening on Armor of God Radio. We're so happy to have you. Alyssa, go ahead with your question.
Hi, thanks. I have a sort of a speculative question here. I know Elon Musk, one of his many pet projects, he wants to upload human consciousness to a digital state or electronic state and thereby make it eternal. He's already done this with cat brains, but it's still super unlikely.
Alyssa, have you heard Elon Musk say that exactly? Or are you just aware of him doing a Neuralink interface to enable, for example, disabled people to express themselves through it?
That's the practical application of the goal he has. I think his end goal is very unlikely. But my question is more fun.
Alyssa, hang on. Alyssa, hang on. So I can't vouch for that. So I'm going to assume that what you're saying is true, or that I know there are people who do want to upload human consciousness to a computer system. I don't know that Elon Musk is one of them. But there are such people, so let's assume that one such person, whether it's Elon Musk or someone else, tries to do that and claims that they have. I would agree with you that it's very unlikely that they would be able to do that. In fact, I would say it's impossible for them to do that. But let's suppose they did. What's your question?
So supposing this technology did happen, could such a uploaded consciousness be afflicted by the demonic the way embodied humans are? And how would a priest go about exorcising such a person when they don't really have a traditional body?
Okay, well, in regard to the first question, now, like I said, I think this is impossible. But supposing it were not impossible, if human consciousness was uploaded to a computer system, would demons still have the ability to affect it? Well, we see evidence in Scripture that both angels and demons are able to affect physical systems. And so the computer that the consciousness was operating on is a physical system, so both angels and demons would be able to affect it. So having a body is not necessary for demons to be able to affect you. So yeah, they could continue to affect it. How would an exorcist be able to help this person, assuming that they were being afflicted by this demon? Well, you don't need a body in order to do an exorcism. Like I mentioned earlier, you can do exorcisms at a distance. Now, there are certain things you can't do at a distance, like you can't anoint the possessed person with holy oil. You can't, sprinkle holy water on them. You can't offer them a cross to hold or impose a cross on their forehead or something like that. But you can say all the prayers. You can say the prayers asking God to help the person. You can say the prayers commanding the demon to get out in the name of Jesus. You can do all that. And so the exorcist would simply use the parts of the rite that can be done with respect to the demon-afflicted person in the computer. And in fact, he might even be able to go further. Like, even if he can't impose a cross on the person's forehead, he could take the cross and impose it on the computer and see if that has an effect. So God's power is unlimited, and therefore there are still ways for God to help someone, even if they're counterfactually in a computer system and being attacked by a demon. God can help you no matter where you are.
Again, we're getting near the end, so I want to get everybody on. Alyssa, thank you very much for the call. Anna is in Pennsylvania. Anna, if you can be a bit quick with your question, it would help us out a great deal.
Yes, hi, thank you.
Sure.
So I am actually Protestant, but I take the teachings of the Catholic Church under serious advisement, especially on certain matters. And I was wondering if the Church has a definite teaching one way or the other on the existence or non-existence of ghosts. And I ask that because I do believe in ghosts, but I'm also very skeptical as to what exactly ghosts are. And I assume that some of the time, or maybe even all of the time, there are demons posing as ghosts. So can you tell us what the Church has to say about that, if anything?
Yeah, so this isn't strictly a matter of church. Well, it depends on how you define ghost. Strictly speaking, the Church teaches that ghosts exist because ghost is just another word for spirit. And the Church does teach that spirits exist. That's why, that the Holy Spirit is sometimes referred to as the Holy Ghost. And he obviously exists. He's one of the three persons of the Trinity. Angels and demons are spirits, so they can be called ghosts. Humans have spirits that survive our deaths, so we have ghosts. So strictly speaking, the Church does teach the existence of spirits or ghosts. Most people, when they use the term ghost, though, are referring to a human spirit that is manifest in after their bodily death. And that is, in fact, the traditional Catholic understanding of what ghosts are, that they are human spirits manifesting after the person's bodily death, very often while they're in the process of purification on their way to heaven. And such ghosts frequently are trying to, for example, tie up bits of business they have left over from life, or they ask for prayers to help them on their journey to heaven or things like that. And the way later theology would express that is these are souls from purgatory who are still being purified on their way to heaven, and they're asking for help from the living. And that was the Catholic understanding of ghosts, not the same as church teaching, but the common Catholic opinion on what ghosts were down to the time of the Reformation and since then. It was in the Protestant community that this idea of we need to suspect demons as impersonating ghosts really got started. Demons can impersonate ghosts. They can even impersonate angels. But it's always a question of what's the evidence that we have for this. If a ghost is showing up and saying, "Hey, will you please pray for me?" that doesn't sound like a demon. That sounds like, someone who is oriented towards God and wants your help reaching God, as opposed to if they show up and a spirit says, "Hey, why don't you worship me?" Well, I'd say that's a demon. So I would say we need to think carefully about what the evidence we have is in a particular case, and we shouldn't just assume that a spirit that's appearing is a demon. In fact, spirit appearances after someone's death is extraordinarily common. In parapsychology, these are known as after-death communications, or ADCs, and between 40 and 50% of the population reports having their dead loved ones appear to them at least once during their lives. And it's hard to think that all of that is due to demons rather than people genuinely being allowed an experience of their departed loved ones by God. If you're interested for more information on this, I've got some episodes of Mysterious World where I deal with this. In particular, you might want to check out, you can go to youtube.com/Jimmy Akin and search on ghosts, but also in particular, look up episodes. Let me see if I can get the episode numbers quickly enough. Episodes 306 and 307 on after-death communications. And I hope that helps.
I do too, Anna. Thank you very much. We got to almost everybody, but the calls kept coming. I guess people are very interested in the topic of demons. Certainly interested in talking with you, Jimmy. Thanks for doing the 2 hours with us.
My pleasure.
And that's our Ask Me Anything About Demons. And now we have your mysterious feedback on our recent episode from Feeling the Future. And the first feedback comes from Chaz, who sends in this voicemail.
Hey, Jimmy and Dom. My name is Chaz, and while I'm not originally from here, I'm currently living in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I just got done listening to the Feeling the Future episode, and it got me thinking. I've heard the explanation on deja vu, that it's a phenomenon that occurs when part of your brain registers something that's happening before another part of your brain registers. And so it feels like a memory of something that's already happened before when it just happened. But the episode got me thinking, is it possible that deja vu could be reinterpreted as evidence for precognition? What are your thoughts on that? Thanks again.
Well, there are a bunch of proposed explanations for deja vu, and my own suspicion is that it may be an all of the above phenomenon. It may be multifactorial. There may be many different things that produce the feeling of deja vu. In addition to the mismatch in timing between when different parts of the brain process something, it's also possible that it could reflect cryptomnesia, or having a hidden memory of something, like maybe you previously were exposed to a similar situation and you're just not remembering it, or maybe you dreamed about a similar situation and you're just not remembering it. That would just be one additional possible explanation for it, and there are quite a number of them. I do think that, given the evidence we have from experiments like the Feel in the Future experiments, that ordinary people have precognition functioning on a low level all the time, that does open up a serious possibility that deja vu in some cases may be actually a precognitive event, where you're sensing what will happen and interpreting that as, wait, this feels familiar in a way it shouldn't. So I think that is a real possibility.
Our next feedback comes from Nick H. It seems odd that psi researchers would use the tools of psychology to prove psi's legitimacy. Psychology hasn't yielded any landmark discoveries, for example, structure of DNA, or created transformative products, like the nonstick frying pan, to use a popular example. In this regard, both psi and psychology seem like religions without miracles. Moreover, psychology has a long history of recommending body horror procedures, for example, lobotomies, electroshock therapy, so-called gender-affirming care, on sick people. ADHD and depression are treated with medications to correct brain chemistry imbalances, even though patient brain chemistry is not measured. Mental health care has never been more mainstream, yet America is reported to be experiencing a nationwide mental health crisis. Psychology as a discipline has carried out its reckless programs without sufficient prospect of success or evidence of positive results. As such, psychology seems to cause more harm than good. If psi wants to be taken seriously, it would do better to dissociate from such a disreputable field.
Well, I certainly understand where you're coming from, and psychology does have a really spotty history, both in terms of practices that have been used in the past. You know, you mentioned electroshock and things like that, and lobotomies and so forth. There also have been problems in psychology on the research front, and there is what's known in science right now as the replication crisis, that where it turns out that a lot of experiments, including some very famous ones, when you run them again, the results can't be replicated, and that applies to psychology in a particular way, although it also affects some other fields. What I can say is that the term parapsychology arose early on, at the same time psychology was developing as a field of discipline. The term parapsychology didn't arise too much after that, so the name parapsychology is almost as old as the name psychology. And there's some logic there in that both fields deal with the psyche, the mind or soul. Psyche is just the Greek word for mind or soul. And they both deal with the mind or soul, so it's logical for them to both have psyche, or a derivative, psycho, in their name. So psychology and parapsychology, it makes some sense. However, there is overlap with a lot of other fields. In fact, when I teach parapsychology, and actually I'm about to teach Introduction to Parapsychology again this October and November, so you can go to rhineedu.org if you're interested in taking that class. But when I teach it, I point out that it does have intersections with a lot of other fields. And so you could also think of it in some cases as paraphysics, paranthropology, pararchaeology, and so forth. So it does have a lot of connections with other fields. It's not strictly related to psychology in particular. In terms of does psychology do more harm than good, that's something I would be formally agnostic on. Despite the problems that psychology has, and every science has problems, especially when it's first starting out. I mean, look at the history of medicine, just conventional medicine. I mean, they used to have the heroic theory of medicine, which involved bloodletting, and they used to do trepanation or drilling holes in your head to cure headaches, and they had a bunch of medical practices that would not pass muster today because they were unsafe and dangerous. But that doesn't mean that we should just dismiss medicine as doing more harm than good. I think that's an empirical question. I think it is one that could be answered, but it would require a lot of research. And I'm not comfortable just sitting in an armchair saying that, because I know that psychology does do good for people. And so I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'd rather sort the wheat from the chaff and figure out which things psychology is doing well and encourage more of that, and then figure out which things it's not doing so well and try to improve those.
All right. Our next feedback comes from Dan Rydell, who writes, frankly, I'm not into the psi topic for the most part, but I appreciate Jimmy's thoroughness and rational storytelling, which is why I listen regularly, even regarding topics that I typically find less engaging. And I will admit I wasn't interested in this episode at the start. As always, the story was well told and the data seemed to be undeniable. Then my consideration went in a new direction, considering psi, the human mind, and behavior. Abraham Maslow long ago wrote on the topic of self-actualization. If we can precognate the data as is defined in these experiments, does that have a direct correlation on our interpretation of ourselves, and then being capable of directing our future toward either more positive or more negative results based on our thoughts? Simply stated, based on our thoughts, are we precognating the future we desire? Please don't misunderstand me to be implying that self-actualization allows us to be a deity unto ourselves, but that it allows us to work within God's plan for our lives by directing the paths we go.
Yeah, Dan, I think I understand what you're saying, and we do have evidence that, as the Feel in the Future episode showed, that ordinary people are using precognition to precognize the likely future and then make adjustments. Like, do I really want to see that image that I might see or not? And, there's an understandable evolutionary reason for that. At least it makes sense in terms of evolutionary biology. If an organism could detect what's likely to happen if nothing changes, then it could use that information to improve its living conditions and improve its chances of surviving and reproducing. So I think that can be understood and articulated in terms of, navigating our environment to find a future that we find desirable without making us deities. It's just like we use our other senses, like vision and hearing and smell, to navigate our environment and foresee dangers and detect opportunities and navigate our way through the world in a way that's hopefully successful for us. So I would say, if we precognize the future, that would just be one more tool in that toolkit.
And now it's time to hear from you. What are your theories about demons and how the church handles them? Let us know by visiting sqpn.com or the Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World Facebook page, sending us an email to feedback@mysterious.fm, sending a tweet to @mys_world, visiting the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord, or by calling our mysterious feedback line at 619-738-4515. That's 619-738-4515.
And I want to say a special word of thanks to Oasis Studio 7 for the video and animation work they did on this episode. You can check out their work by going to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy Akin. And while you're there, be sure and hit the bell notification, subscribe, and share the podcast, because I've got lots of other videos on all kinds of different subjects that I hope you and your friends would enjoy.
All right. So, Jimmy, what's our next episode going to be about?
Next week, we're going to be revisiting a mystery that we looked at in the early days of the podcast, and we're going to be giving you an update with some new information that I didn't have when we originally tackled it. So next time, we're going to be going back to 1947 and looking at the Kenneth Arnold UFO sighting that kicked off the modern UFO era.
Excellent. Folks, be sure to, as Jimmy said, share the podcast with your friends and write a review wherever you can write reviews of podcasts or shows, whether it's Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify. Help us grow this community and reach more listeners. Be sure to get your very own Mysterious World t-shirt, mug, or more in our merchandise shop at sqpn.com/merch. You'll find links to Jimmy's resources from our discussion on our show notes at mysterious.fm/384. And remember, to help us continue to produce the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is also brought to you in part by The Grady Group, a Catholic company bringing financial clarity to their clients across the United States, using safe money options to produce reasonable rates of return for their clients. Learn more at GradyGroupInc.com. And by Rosary Army, featuring award-winning Catholic podcasts, rosary resources, videos, and the School of Mary online community, prayer, and learning platform. Learn how to make them, pray them, and give them away while growing in your faith at rosaryarmy.com and schoolofmary.com. Until next time, Jimmy Akin, thank you for exploring with us our mysterious world.
Thanks, Tom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on StarQuest.